Hi everyone, I'm Jake from Cytronex. This video is going to guide you through the fitting process of Cytronex for Brompton. Inside your Cytronex box, you'll have the motor wheel, your charger and the bottle box. This will contain your bottle holder with cabling, and this will be pre-configured for the fitting type that you've chosen. If you opted for Cytronex mounts, they'll be included in a separate bag. Cytronex bottles inside with zip ties, an additional bag of small fixings. If you've opted for lights, those will also be included here, as you can see, and PTFE tubing. The tools you're going to need to complete your Cytronex Brompton installation are as follows: cable cutters, pliers, 2.5, a 5 and potentially a 6mm Allen key, a 15, 13, 10 and pair of 8mm spanners. If you're having lights fitted to your bike, you'll also need a 2mm Allen key, some cable strippers and a Torx T20 tool. So the first thing to note, if your bike is fitted with dynamo lights, these will no longer work once you've got the Cytronex motor wheel fitted. So these will need to be removed. You also can't use non-Cytronex lights with the Cytronex system. The first thing we can do on the bike itself is remove both wheels. I'm going to start with the front wheel here. You'll need two tools, one for undoing the wheel itself and another for your brake cable. This particular bike needs a 5mm Allen key and a 10mm spanner. So we're just going to undo the brake cable pinch bolt and open up the caliper, and then use the appropriate tool to undo the front wheel. Take that out. So for removing the rear wheel on your bike, it's really important that first of all, if you have got two sprockets, that you're in the smallest one, and you also want to shift into the hardest gear on your bike so that you have as much cable slack as possible in the gear cable mechanism. There are different versions of this mechanism. On this bike, I just have to squeeze this and remove the index chain, but on newer models, there's two little nuts that you unwind and then they detach. So I'm going to pull this apart first of all and unwind this from the hub. I can then remove the derailleur. Pop that aside. I'm then going to undo the cable pinch bolt for the brake cable. And then lastly, undo the wheel nuts. These are usually a 15mm spanner. And then these will just move out of the way. And then if you roll your wheel forward, you'll be able to move it off the bike. If your order included a tyre and tube, that will be pre-fitted in your kit box for you. If you didn't, you'll need to swap your existing tyre and tube over to the motor wheel. So what I like to do next is fit the bottle holder onto the bike. If you've got riv nuts, you will need those to be fitted by a professional. This particular bike is going to have riv nuts fitted, so we're going to skip ahead after that's done. But if you have opted for Cytronex mounts, they look like this, and our written fitting instructions show you how those are fitted onto the bike. We now need to fit the bottle holder onto the bike. We've got the riv nuts fitted there. So our sense cable goes over the right hand side of the bike, and the two fixing bolts are going to go onto the riv nuts that are fitted. Use a 3mm Allen key to tighten these down onto the frame. I tend to alternate between tightening them just so you get a nice flat fitting. And it's important you don't over tighten these, so once you start to feel some resistance, just give them a little nip up and that'll be tight enough. Next, you want to take the Cytronex boost button and we're going to install this on the inside of the grip. It's important that the cable itself follows the mechanical cables on the bike so that when the bike folds it doesn't get pulled. Boost button is going to go here, and you're going to need two of the skinny and short zip ties in the included bundle. These go through slots in the back of the boost button, and they'll just loop round your handlebar to fix it in place. Just pull these tight by hand for now. Since we're already at the front of the bike, we're going to go ahead and fit the Cytronex motor wheel into the forks. Important thing to note here, the motor cable itself has to be on the rider's left-hand side, or the left-hand side of your bike. The cable also has to emerge downwards when we fit it in. So lift that up into place. These little tab washers turn around and they'll insert into the holes that are in your Brompton fork. Do that on both sides. And you're going to need a 13mm spanner to tighten these up. We recommend torquing these to 25 Newton meters, which is quite tight. What you may have to do with your bike is make adjustment to the brake pad position. You can check this by just squeezing the caliper and checking whether the brake pads make proper contact with the rim. It's important to note that the Cytronex motor wheel does sit very slightly lower in the forks, and if you do need to make an adjustment, it's mostly done with a 5mm Allen key on the brake pad themselves. On this particular bike, the pads look like they're in proper position, so I can actually go ahead and tighten the brake pinch bolt. Next, we're going to connect the motor cable to the motor itself. There is a ferrite bead on the motor cable. You want to just push that up and out of the way. The important thing with the motor cable is it is directional, and you have to align two arrows and fully push together. You're then going to take the fork clip, and that goes onto the motor cable, and you need one of the short, thick zip ties. This is going to go around the fork leg itself and behind the brake cable. Again, just tighten this by hand for now. To finish installing the motor cable on your bike, you're going to need to make sure the ferrite bead itself is behind the hinge. You can then push the motor cable into the triangular shaped motor cable support, and you need a small thick zip tie that goes through it. When you tie the zip tie in place, you want to make sure it's behind this hinge as well. Again, just pull tight by hand for now. Next, we're going to get rid of the slack in the boost button cable. If you've got a kit with lights, we're actually going to come back to this at a later stage once the headlight itself has been fitted. But for those without lights, you can use the 3 pretzel clips that are supplied in the parts in your bottle box. One half clips onto the mechanical cable. You then put the boost button cable in place and then attach the other half back onto the mechanical cable. You can use this one down the bottom to get rid of slack, and we're going to attach another one up here and another nearer the boost button. So we're going to begin sorting out the back end of the bike now, and the first stage is going to be disconnecting the sensor cable. You're now going to take the sensor connector itself and feed it through this chainstay on the bike. It's going to come out at the other end, and then we'll be able to reconnect it where we just disconnected it. It's important when you bring the sensor cable through that it's behind the mechanical cables on the bike by the chainring. Pull this gently through, reconnect it to the other sensor cable, and then it can clip away to the built-in clip on the bottle holder. To fit the Cytronex Brompton sensor, there are a number of steps. Firstly, you need to take the sensor itself and pass it through this hole in your frame. Step 2, you need to take two 8mm spanners and undo the bolt that's holding on your rack here. Step 3 is fitting the sensor inside the sensor bracket. So you can see it's got this almost snowman shape on there, and that is important. To do so, you want to take the sensor itself and fold the wide side back against the cable. From here, you can see it's going to fit inside there. The hole here is how we're going to fix that onto the frame. Step 4 is going to be fixing the sensor bracket onto the frame. Just gently push the sensor cable through the frame. Line that hole up on the bracket with the one on the frame where we removed this bolt earlier, and that's going to go through your mudguard or rack arms, through the sensor bracket itself. Use any washers and nuts that you removed for the refitting process as well. And then take your pair of 8mm spanners again to tighten this in position. Before you tighten this fully, it's really important that the sensor cable itself is not caught and that the bracket is rotated down into its lowest position, and then tighten in place. Step 5, we need to prepare the sensor itself to be in the correct position. The sensor can be moved in and out of the receptacle to accommodate for different sprocket positions. In order to set the correct distance from the end of the sensor to your sprocket, you'll need to attach the supplied sensor spacer. That just clips onto the end, and then just gently pull your sensor inwards so that it's protruding a little bit more, and we'll move to the next step. Step 6, we need to reinsert the wheel into the bike. Pull your chain backwards, and if you have two sprockets, I suggest hooking it over the biggest one. Rotate the axle so your tab washers are in the correct position, and gently lift the wheel into place. As you do this, you'll see that the orange spacer contacts the smallest sprocket. Finish tightening these up, and then use a 2mm Allen key to tighten the two bolts on the outside of the sensor bracket. Do this in equal amounts until it's fully tightened. What's happening here is there's a wedge inside the receptacle that's constricting the sensor, and we'll keep it in position once these are tightened up. We can now gently pedal forward, and the sensor spacer pops out, and we've correctly set the gap between the end of the sensor and the sprocket. Step 7, we're going to verify that the sensor is actually working correctly. To do this, lift up the spring-loaded catch and open the lever. Take your Cytronex bottle with the logo on the left-hand side and place that onto the rear section. Move it beneath the plug and then use the lever to click it into place. To put the bike into setup mode, press and hold the left side of the boost button. Once you see blue and white together, you can release it. Gently pedal the bike forward, and if you get a solid green light, you know your sensor is in the right position. Now that we're happy the sensor's working. Step 8 is actually going to be tightening the rear wheel nuts, resetting the brake up and reattaching all of our gear mechanism. So start with the rear wheel. That needs a 15mm spanner. Just tighten these up. For this particular bike, I do need a 10mm spanner for doing the brake cable, but you might need a 5mm Allen key if you're using a newer bike. Just tighten this up. You shouldn't need to make any brake pad adjustment because the rear wheel is in the same place it was before, it's just the front wheel that sits slightly differently. Refit the rover. Going to need a 15mm spanner for this one. Doesn't need to be tight, just need to nip that up so it can't move. Reattach your index chain. This is a customer's bike and this one is a little bit fiddly. There we go. And reattach it into the bike. To remove the slack from your sensor cable here, you'll need to take 2 of the zip ties from the zip tie bundle that have small clips on them. They go around this part of the frame. Just like so. Clip them both on first. And then they'll just clip in. It's quite firm. If you do struggle to clip down into this lower one, pull some of the sensor cable down, because you'll need a little loop of cable down behind the bottom bracket, and then you can slide this whole thing downwards. Like so. And then pull these tight by hand. You don't want there to be an excessive loop of cable here, just a nice rounded shape. The next step is going to be putting all of our zip ties tight and cutting off their tails with some cable cutters. If you had a Cytronex kit with no lights, you're all done and you're ready to enjoy riding your bike. If you do have Cytronex lights, continue watching the rest of the video. If you order Cytronex lights, the headlight itself will be pre-fitted with the light bracket. We do need to take this apart in order to fit it to the bike, so pay attention to where the parts are before reassembling. There are 2 nuts on the back, and those are attached to 2 2mm bolts on the outside. So undo those first of all. Remove the bolts. And then remove this centerpiece. What we'll then need to do is pull the little tab up on the zip tie. These are reusable, to remove the tail. And now we're ready to move to the bike. To install the headlight, we need to fit this zip tie underneath the stem pinch bolt. On certain bikes, it's not possible to fit this in, and you'll need to release the stem bolt. I have to do that on this particular bike, but before doing so, I'm just going to use a whiteboard pen to mark the position of the handlebars. I'm now going to undo the front here. That's why that mark's important, because the bars are going to move on their own, and we should now be able to fit our zip tie through, and then it's going to pass through the opposing hole in the bracket. Pull that as firm as you can by hand, and then gently rotate the bars back to their correct position. Just snug that up a little bit so that the bars don't move. Just get a little bit tighter. And now take a set of pliers and pull this as tight as you can. Finish tightening the stem pinch bolt. This isn't required on all bikes, but on older bikes in particular, it is something you might have to do. We're now going to fit the bracket for the light itself. Take the headlight and place it over the 3D mounted bracket. You're then going to need to take the 2 bolts that you removed earlier and pass these through each of the headlight sides and the 3D part. Like so. And then fit the nuts onto each one as well. It can be quite fiddly because they're small. Now, in order to tighten these, you are going to need to use a 2mm Allen key, and if you have a small enough spanner, you can put it on the nut. But it's easy just to use a set of pliers to grab the nut, and then from the other side, tighten the bolt. Do this until they bind and you know they're nice and tight. To finish tightening the headlight in place, push the headlight downwards and then use a Torx T20 to tighten the pinch bolt on the back. Final step with the headlight here is just going to be snipping the tail of the zip tie. Take the connector for the headlight and pass this behind any mechanical cabling at the front and pull it over to the right hand side. You're then going to connect the wire from the boost button to the connector from the headlight. They just push together. And if your bottle isn't showing a light, just remove it from the plug and reconnect it to wake it up. And then on the button to turn the headlight on, press and hold the right hand side until you see white and amber together and release. If the headlight comes on, you know your connector is the right way round. If the light does not come on, disconnect this and switch them around. Take the end of your light cable and pass it through the provided PTFE tube sleeve. This is then going to follow the mechanical cable on the bike and go through a cable guide on the frame. Just pull that through. You want the PTFE tubing to end roughly at the back of the chainring. Slide the PTFE tubing and it ends just here. If your current reflector is behind the brake caliper on your bike and you don't have a Cytronex rack mounted reflector or light currently, you're going to make sure that the light cable has some slack down here, just like the sense cable does, and the light wire will run up this part of the frame and back along to the rear light. If you have a rack mounted light, follow the next steps to see how that's installed. If you have a Brompton fitted with a rack, you'll need to pass the light wire through the chainstay on the left hand side of the bike, and the wire is going to follow up the rack arm. There will be some excess cabling, but before you cut it, you want to ensure you've got some slack down in the bottom bracket area to allow the wheel to fold under. When you're happy with the length of your rear light cable, use cable cutters to cut to size. You then need to use cable strippers to remove about 25mm from the black jacket and then 10mm from each the blue and the red cables themselves. In order to test that the rear light is working and you have the wires in the correct orientation, you first need to turn the lights on again. You do this by holding the right hand side of the boost button until the white and amber LEDs are shown, and then releasing. At this point, the blue and the red wires are live, and in the rear of the rear light you've got two little holes there where the cables can enter. Take the ends of the cables, and to check the orientation, touch the two terminals on the underside. As you can see, the rear light comes on when the red is on the left and the blue is on the right. So I'm just going to gently twist them and create a hook, and then offer them up inside the rear light and close shut. The two bolts on the back of the rear light are now going to fix to the bracket already on place on your bike. Take the washers that are supplied, place one over each of the bolts, pop this through the bracket on your frame, and this bit is quite fiddly, but you're going to take another washer and one of the locking nuts and fix this in position. Finish tightening the rear light in place with an 8mm spanner. Be careful not to over tighten these because you can damage the rear light. Use any remaining zip ties to keep the rear light cable in position and to prevent it from catching on the rear wheel. I tend to put one down the bottom here and then another near the top. These just need to be done up hand tight but firm, and then you can trim off the tails. We mentioned earlier in the video that if you had Cytronex lights on your bike, not to use the pretzel clips to secure away your boost button cabling. We're going to do that now as our final step, and the reason for this is that we want to secure both the boost button cable and the light cable onto a mechanical cable. Take one of the pretzel clips, hook it onto the mechanical cable, pop in both the boost button cabling and the light cable, and then push the clip over to clip it and secure it away. Repeat this process slightly higher up the cable and again nearer the boost button. You've now installed Cytronex on your Brompton. Thanks for watching and happy riding.